Breaking news, Sam Altman is out as CEO of OpenAI. The company just announcing a leadership transition, and it appears Altman was fired. The board saying Altman had not been consistently candid with the board. He will be replaced by Mira Murati, who currently serves as CTO, Chief Technology Officer. So this is an earthquake, really,
Yeah.
Julie. Sam Altman is a big name in Silicon Valley. What we know right now is the board has said Sam Altman's going to step down as CEO. The CTO steps in here as sort of interim while they look for a permanent replacement. I think the money quote here is the board saying that it conducted a deliberative review process, concluded he was not consistently candid in his communications with the board, hindering its ability to exercise its responsibility. They go on to say the board no longer has confidence in his ability to continue leading OpenAI.
Yes, exactly. So this raises a lot of questions. What exactly happened here? And perhaps more information will come out at this point. Why is this so important? Why is this so earth-shattering? He's not just a big deal in Silicon Valley. He has become the face of AI, or at least one of the main faces of AI. He's testified before Congress. He's met with CEOs. OpenAI, of course, a main partner for the likes of Microsoft. And, ChatGPT has really been the AI product in generative AI that has changed the perception of its abilities earlier this year. And he is intertwined with all of that. So the fact that he is now effectively being fired, and he also co-founded OpenAI, by the way, all of this is a very big deal. As part of it, Greg Brockman, who co-founded it, this organization with him, will be stepping down as chairman of the board as well. He'll remain in his role at the company, though, reporting to the CEO, who, again, on an interim basis, will be Mira Murati. And then presumably they'll either appoint her permanently or find another permanent CEO.
Yeah, I mean, you look at OpenAI, listen, it went from kind of small nonprofit to a multi-billion-dollar company. And it was Sam Altman who helped steer that, right? Mm-hmm. They unveiled their AI chatbot, ChatGPT goes viral. It was Sam Altman who helped convince, the likes of Microsoft, which has put in more than $10 billion into this company. And as you said, also, Julian, it's a good point. It's not just OpenAI. He is truly one of the preeminent faces of the industry. It's Sam Altman who was on Capitol Hill talking to lawmakers about what future regulation could look like. It was Sam Altman who, just this week, talking to APEC about what the future of AI is going to look like. So this is a big deal. As you said, a lot of questions, though, about what exactly happened here.
Yes. Will we hear from Sam Altman directly? Will we get more information about why he was asked to leave? What will he do next, if anything? Will we not hear from him for a while? Will he move to another organization? A lot of questions that I think we'll be looking at for quite some time here. Let's continue this discussion because the future of OpenAI is uncertain after its board ousted founder and CEO Sam Altman. Now the employees are threatening to jump ship to Microsoft. Our next guest is Altman's future at Microsoft has some real upside for the tech giant. With us now is Fred Havemeyer. He is Macquarie lead software equity research analyst. Fred, you just heard us talking about this. We don't even know if one moment to the next, if indeed Altman is going to end up at Microsoft. As somebody who's trying to analyze this company and its future profits, just give us, first of all, a little color on how you're following all this and sort of analyzing it in real time.
Well, following and analyzing in real time is actually very accurate because I think I was publishing at around 4 a.m. last night when the news was coming out that Microsoft was hiring Sam Altman as CEO of a new AI venture, as Satya Nadella published on X and or Twitter. So the way that I'm thinking about it is that right now, I think Satya has essentially pulled off a coup that I have not seen the likes of before in the tech market. He's pulled in and brought in Sam Altman, CEO of, as we've all been talking about here, CEO of OpenAI and one of the clear visionaries in the entire generative AI landscape right now. And also, of course, someone who has been leading the commercialization push within OpenAI. And following that, we've heard the news that now the majority of engineers at OpenAI are considering leaving the company and potentially moving over to Microsoft, which appears to be ready to welcome them with open arms. So I think in the range of outcomes here, we see either an opportunity where Microsoft ends up consolidating and essentially acquiring OpenAI without actually having to tender any sort of acquisition under the present scenario where Sam Altman is running as CEO this own AI venture within Microsoft. In a second scenario, even if we go a route where Sam Altman returns to OpenAI, I think Microsoft would continue to benefit. We would see continued commercialization, likely of models, and an emphasis on shipping product, which, if you recall back with the Microsoft partnership, OpenAI has delivered to Microsoft a licensing agreement that gives Microsoft access to every large language model and AI model that OpenAI produces, up to what the board defines as artificial general intelligence. So it's a scenario where I think Satya played everything very well. I think that overall just reinforces our view that Microsoft is the top pick in the generative AI landscape for us.
But Fred, let me ask you this though. Microsoft at the same time, it has this big stake in OpenAI, right? And it was valued, I think, Fred, at something like $86 billion. But now we're in this state, we don't know what OpenAI is worth. Should investors, how are financial analysts thinking about that?
I think when we consider that partnership to begin with, part of it has been cash and part of it has been compute credits on Azure. So if we think about this partnership in general, it's been one that's benefited Microsoft also through its commercialization of OpenAI, such that if we look at the last quarter, we estimated that Microsoft was operating in Azure at about a $1.6 billion run rate for its generative AI related services. So with the amount of revenue that Microsoft is generating through existing Copilot solutions, in addition to the commercialization of things like OpenAI hosted on Azure through this licensing agreement, we think there's still tremendous value here. Whether or not OpenAI remains an independent, commercialized, and really border-pushing tech company, or whether this ultimately is internalized within Microsoft as its own AI venture, we continue to think that they win.
And the title of your note on this was, "If you come at the king, you best not miss," referring to Sam Altman. What is it about this guy, Fred, that is so magical, seemingly, that nobody wants him to leave, everybody wants him? Is he really so bound up here in the future of AI?
So I think when considering what Sam Altman brings to the table, it's been a consistent vision towards what the future could be in terms of developing, commercializing generative AI. I think Sam Altman has been shown to just have a very keen business mind that is able to synthesize just a very complex technology and topics and convey it and do the storytelling in a way that makes sense to both investors as well as those teams that he is building. And I think the team building part is actually one of the most critical aspects to discuss here. One of the reasons that the engineers and teams at OpenAI appear so ready to join him is from just what we've been hearing, the general loyalty that he inspires among the teams that he's been building, cultivating, and also pushing in many ways to produce the best technology possible. I think that's been one consistent refrain, is that Sam Altman always tends to push those that he's working with to continue that acceleration towards developing something new, disrupting something new, and delivering just category-defining products.
And Fred, talking about Microsoft as well, listen, you're a bull, you got to buy on the name. It has surged this year, Fred, so we're up about 60% here. What are the catalysts ahead, Fred, that you think moves Microsoft higher? And do you, even with that surge, you obviously still think valuation's attractive?
Oh, I definitely think valuation is attractive here. So the way I'm thinking about Microsoft in general is when I look at the opportunity ahead in the generative AI landscape, I tend to think that we are just at the very early stages of what this market might offer. So even though I quoted a number about $1.6 billion of annualized revenue in Azure related to AI services, I would note that that's up, we estimate, about almost 3 times quarter over quarter on a run rate basis. So this is, despite being early stages, something that's growing very quickly and something that's, as Microsoft called out, driving growth for Azure through the balance of this year. And we think that is something that is at this very early stage, with enterprises still beginning to experiment with how to bring generative AI into their companies, something that we're very excited about and we think will continue to drive long-term momentum in this stock.
Fred, I got to ask what this means for everybody else, right? Has the picture changed? And I know you don't cover it directly, but has the picture changed over the weekend for an Alphabet or for a Meta, or for that matter, for something like a Salesforce, which you do cover? Or is this, because it's sort of still Microsoft, it doesn't really change the equation for others?
So I think that what we may see, and this will depend, of course, on where things shake out, because I think all of us have seen the headlines are moving in real time as we speak. But I think it will depend ultimately on where the talent at OpenAI ends up. I think if the talent remains consolidated within OpenAI or perhaps within Microsoft, we may see a continuation of the just commercialization of generative AI technologies within Microsoft that's similar to the present environment. I think generally there's likely a number of companies that are thinking about their counterparty risk right now and what things might look like if suddenly most engineers at OpenAI were to leave. We took a look at it through the example of ChatGPT. Can that, for example, be sustained on a skeleton shift of engineers potentially keeping that up and running? So I think in general, it will depend on where the OpenAI engineers remain. Likely, if Microsoft is able to build out its own expertise with, for example, hiring OpenAI engineers, I think Google would have a potentially very difficult competitive landscape in front of it, where its own DeepMind organization would now face not just OpenAI, but the consolidated OpenAI within Microsoft that unlocks the entire Microsoft balance sheet, potentially for future innovation and development built on top of Azure. I think if we think more broadly in the landscape, Meta has had this open source large language model approach, and it's unlikely things would change around that strategy there. But in terms of the giants that are commercializing, I think that it could be very beneficial for Microsoft. Once again, just it depends on whether or not the engineers end up in Microsoft, OpenAI, or elsewhere.
All right.
We think
that's the question we're all going to keep watching, Fred. Fred Havemeyer from Macquarie, thank you so much for your time and your insight today, Fred. That was great.
Thank you.
Moving on here, the ouster of Sam Altman as CEO at OpenAI, sending shockwaves through the tech world, surprising Wall Street and Silicon Valley. OpenAI has been at the center of the artificial intelligence hype, receiving billions in funding, including a multi-billion-dollar investment from Microsoft. As aftershocks of the C-suite shakeup wreaks havoc on OpenAI, we're taking a look at what this all means for Silicon Valley and future startups. Here to discuss, we have Kamran Ansari, Headline Venture partner. So Kamran, let's just start with the general news here. And listen, the headlines keep shifting here. Kamran, we're not sure exactly how we're going to end up the day, but I want to get your just take here. What did you make of the news so far? What was your take?
It's been astonishing. It's been like watching, telenovela or soap opera these last few days. This is a company that is probably one of the most influential, important companies that's emerged in the last decade or longer. And you've had 3 CEOs in the past 72 hours. So it's still unclear exactly what's happening. And it's obviously the talk of not just the tech and the venture business, but now, more broadly, all over the general news, and the general public is also interested in what's happening here. So it's been kind of a very unusual set of circumstances that's come together to have this happen. And I think a lot of it that I'm hearing, at least in the tech and venture space, is around what this says for just governance and corporate governance, and really having folks think about, hey, how are boards comprised? Who are these board members exactly? Because a lot of times that ends up being sort of an afterthought as you're putting together financing round for early stage company. It's like, oh yeah, we'll put these guys on the board. That's just how it's going to work. And then you realize that, no, these things actually do matter quite a bit.
Well, what's so interesting to me, Kamran, is that discussion has been around for a while, and we get these periodic reminders. This is a very dramatic one, to be sure, but why hasn't Silicon Valley gotten its act? This is not news, right? Why haven't they gotten their act together on some discipline when it comes to these boards?
So you think about it, I really compare this, and what this reminded me of was the situation with Uber when they were replacing Travis Kalanick, and they brought in Dhar, who's been fantastic, an amazing CEO there. But that process took place over the course of many weeks, and then there was a weekend-long board meeting. They had I think a 10, 12, 15-person board with public company CEOs and professional investors, members of the founding team there. So there were a ton of folks kind of weighing in. It was a very kind of buttoned-up professional process they went through, and they found that the best answer for them was to make a change of the CEO and do that. This was a 4-person board or 5-person board if you include Sam, which is a very unusual dynamic for a business at this scale. Normally you would see something at this scale have 7, 9, 11-person board. And then the makeup of the board itself, I think, Vinod Khosla put out a post today, just because someone has a fancy title, like, the head of technology, center at Georgetown, whatever, that person may not have sat on a lot of private company or public company boards. And so it's unclear whether these folks that were kind of making this decision, really had kind of the purview, the perspective, and the experience to be doing so.
And Kamran, I'm interested too, just your take on what founders might take away from this. I mean, granted, Sam Altman is not your typical founder, but are there lessons learned for founders in all this drama?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the biggest lesson learned is, pick your board members carefully, right? Or make sure that the board composition is something that you're comfortable with going forward. And I think that, typically for an early stage company, what you want to have is usually you'll have one or two of the critical kind of main investors who sit on a number of boards, who've kind of been through this movie before, have seen companies go through ups, downs, exits, fundraising events, all that sort of thing. You may have the one or two founders on the board. And then typically what you want to see is like an independent or two, someone from industry, an experienced business veteran in the space that you're in. And that'll kind of round out, a typical board, what that might look like. And so that's sort of best practice. Now, in a lot of cases, if you're starting a company and you're just raised a seed or Series A round, you're not going to go through all that process. You may just have an investor or two and the founder, and that's it. But again, as companies mature, and certainly this company, and I say company, I know it's a nonprofit that owns the wholly owned subsidiary, that's the for-profit, but an entity of this scale at this point should have had, I think, a larger, more sophisticated board. I think you're going to see that now. And one of the other bizarre things is that, the largest shareholders, again, I know it's the for-profit side, it's kind of complicated. Microsoft didn't have a seat, right? You would always expect Microsoft, Sequoia, Tiger, these folks that have large stakes in the business to have seats on the board, and they didn't in this case. So then you're going to see a bunch of changes here happening, not just at OpenAI, but I think all the cohort of companies that are similar.
The other thing I'm curious about is there is, I think, a scenario here where everybody loses their money. Like where the investment they put in goes to nothing, goes to zero. So what kind of a ripple effect does that have in the industry? And is it a black eye for the firms that invested in OpenAI?
I think certainly the firms that invested in OpenAI, I imagine they probably did push for a board seat, right? But at a certain point when a company or entity is hot, it's singular, it's the best deal of the century, you sort of let that stuff go. You say, oh, fine, okay, we won't take the board seat, it's fine. I think you saw something similar happen with FTX, where I don't believe that a bunch of the investors really had board seats there because a different Sam, that founder was like, look, I don't want you guys on the board, or we only have 3 seats and that's it. And you say, okay, fine, in order to get involved with this rocket ship, I got to go along with this governance structure. But I think you're going to see the investors push back more. I think the other ripple effect it's having for sure is that all the competing companies that for a while have been sort of playing second fiddle to OpenAI, they're seeing an uptick obviously in applications for jobs. People may be leaving OpenAI. Clients that are looking to reach out and diversify away from relying on OpenAI. So Cohere, Google, Anthropic, all these other businesses that have AI capability are now going to be the beneficiary of this potentially. And it's still not, it's a huge mess, because I think today you saw that 500 to the 700 plus employees have sort of signed a petition saying they don't have faith in the board. They're probably looking for jobs elsewhere. I think you saw news that a number of the OpenAI clients have reached out to other competing solutions to use those instead of OpenAI. So it's having a real damaging effect. And I think before the end of the week, you're going to see some probably significant changes happening with OpenAI, because I don't believe that the folks like Microsoft and Sequoia and others that are invested there are going to let this just kind of go away.
Yeah. And Kamran, finally, just quickly here, we were having you on originally to just talk about the bigger environment for VCs, and then this whole thing happened. Just quickly, how do you think 2024 looks at this point? Do valuations improve? Do we start to see more exits, or do things kind of bump along here?
Well, I think you've seen in the last 6 months a real pickup in both deal activity. You saw a number of IPOs come out finally in September, October. You had Klaviyo and Instacart and Arm. It all started with Kava, the Mediterranean food company or a restaurant back in the spring. So there are a number of other folks that I think are in the pipeline that I think will start to come out in the public market. Names that have been circulated for a while, like Stripe and maybe Plaid, a company, Databricks, Intercom potentially. There are a lot of these folks that have been kind of ready or almost ready. But I think now the window may be opening for them as we head into 2024. And then M&A should pick up too. M&A has been very quiet other than private equity firms buying these sort of great SaaS names. But that's all played out too. They've all been taken out. So Coupa and Zoom, Sumo Logic and Avalara, they've all been bought, right? So by and large now, the great SaaS names that were, at approachable valuations are gone. So the private equity folks don't have a lot to buy anymore. So I think you're going to have M&A picking up now that we're in kind of hopefully a more stable interest rate environment. There's more predictability, and I think the buyers feel more comfortable kind of jumping in.
All right, Kamran, Ansari, thank you so much for joining the show today, Kamran.
All right, thanks so much.
Sam Altman's exit from OpenAI causes a shakeup in Silicon Valley. Many are speculating on what this means for the broader industry, and one key concern in particular, that's safety. The release of OpenAI's latest model of ChatGPT saw major players in the tech space call for a pause in development of generative AI overall, raising concerns over its existential risks. Joining us now is Newman, professor of media and technology at NYU. Thank you so much for being here. Amidst all this kerfuffle was some reporting that there was some concern that the commercialization of AI at OpenAI was proceeding too quickly, maybe was raising some safety concerns. What do you think is going on here, Russ? Do you think the industry is being careful enough?
Well, I think we can speculate there were 4 issues that could have been intertwined in the boardroom dramatics out on 18th Street in San Francisco. The first is the issue of safety and whether pausing would make any sense. But my view is that if you sort of stop or slow down, that's not going to make any difference. You got to put more energy into finding AI systems that can do the monitoring, because humans can't keep up with these large-scale systems. The second thing is OpenAI was supposed to be open source, and it's not clear whether it makes any sense to have an open source program when you have 1.7 trillion different parameters. If you can open that up, nobody can make sense of that. So if it's the concept of open source in this day and age makes a lot less sense. And the third thing is the notion of commercialization of for-profit, not-for-profit. It seems to me we wouldn't have seen what's going on if there wasn't the investment from Microsoft to make it possible. The fourth possible issue that would generate the boardroom drama is simply the personalities. So my take on it is all 4 of those potential issues are sort of non-issues, because if you generate a company based on selling your access to your foundational AI model and it's not safe, that's not economic either. So there's a lot of incentive to keep things safe economically.
And Russ, what is the biggest near-term risk when it comes to AI that you see?
There was a study at Stanford where they took something like $400 to $500, and with that amount could tune a system and reschedule it, reorganize the system so that preventions that were built into the AI system were no longer at play. So it's just going to be a wild west. We got to get used to this. If there are malicious players out there, it's very difficult to say, well, my foundational model will prevent that, because the tuning of these systems is going to reopen up all those questions all over again.
Does what has happened over the past few days change this equation at all?
It changes it for the personalities involved in OpenAI, but I'm guessing it's going to be about a dozen foundational models paid for in large part by the large tech players, and that all of the action is going to be on finding fine-tuned specialized versions of those foundation models. And that's good news. That means there's going to be many dozens of players working these models. GPT-4 cost $100 million and took 100 days and 25,000 NVIDIA chips to build it. That means that setting up a foundation model is going to take a big investment. All the action is going to be on fine-tuning those models for specialized purposes.
And Russ, the fact that it is such big players and it is so expensive to build these models, does that imply that they will be more careful, if for no other reason than fear of liability, as they move forward?
Yeah, I think I think the whole concept that if somebody was complaining, you guys are for profit, you're talking to Microsoft too soon, the notion that a not for profit would have different incentives, I think is naive.
And Russ, what in your opinion is the proper role of regulators when it comes to this technology? And do you trust, Russ, and have confidence in American lawmakers? I see you're laughing already. Maybe you know where I'm going, but do you have trust and confidence, Russ, in American lawmakers and regulators? Do they have the insight, the experience, frankly, the tech chops to know how to regulate this technology smartly, responsibly, effectively?
AI is basically applied mathematics. You can't regulate mathematics. The one-liner I've been using is trying to regulate AI is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. I was surprised by Altman's appeal to say, let's have some regulatory review of these issues. The president's executive order was very careful not to recommend a new regulatory agency. And I hope that becomes the posture of all the future administrations, because I think it's a sorry, it's going to be an unsuccessful, even if well-intended effort on the part of the federal government to regulate.
And so, I guess from a developmental perspective, what do we make of, does it matter if Altman stays at OpenAI? Does it matter if he goes to Microsoft in terms of just where generational AI goes going forward?
Well, with the news that 700 of 770 employees want some change, my guess is the drama will be over fairly quickly, and we'll see a reorganized OpenAI as a major player. Nobody quite understood how, with Microsoft's very substantial investment in OpenAI, they weren't more involved in the future of that enterprise. My guess is we'll see some kind of a compromise, whether Sam and Greg are working for Microsoft. My guess is if they don't get cooperating, they'll take the building across this 18th Street and look at each other through the windows, and we'll see a lot of progress on both sides of 18th Street.
Russ, finally, I mentioned that letter that a lot of people signed that raising concerns about the sort of existential threat potentially that AI can pose. Elon Musk has brought that up. Jeffrey Hinton has brought that up. Sam Altman, I think, signed on to that very letter. I know you didn't sign that letter. Are you concerned that, there's existential threat to humanity from the development of AI?
I am. I think we need to take it seriously. These are very bright young men and women. And when they said, let's stop for 6 months, they knew we wouldn't stop. They knew it wasn't possible. They just wanted to find a way to draw our attention. And I think that attention is well spent. What we got to do is work harder, work faster on keeping these things under control. And I think the more investment, the better.
Russ Newman, great to get your perspective on this. Thanks so much for taking some time to spend with us.
Thank you.
Former CEO Sam Altman is bringing his skill set to Microsoft. Now, Altman will head the company's artificial intelligence research team. He will be joined by OpenAI co-founder Greg Brockman and a few other former colleagues from the ChatGPT startup. With more on what this series of major shakeups means for Microsoft and the AI industry at large, I'm joined by Vasant Dhar, NYU Professor of Technology, Operations and Statistics. Thank you for joining us this morning. So first of all, talk about this timeline here. And given where we are in the timing of generative AI and the explosion that we've seen it have over the tech giants, what do you make of this move?
It is so bizarre what just happened. And it seems so poorly thought out by OpenAI's board, right? So, one day they announced that, Sam Altman's fired. Then there's talk about maybe he's coming back, and now he's hired by Microsoft, which, by the way, I think was a brilliant move by Microsoft. I have to take my hat off to Satya for making this move. It's almost like a preemptive move to get the IP into Microsoft.
And so we've been seeing some media reports of drawing parallels between Apple's board firing Steve Jobs back in the day in 1985. Do you see the same parallels that OpenAI could perhaps, when you look at what happened with Sam Altman, and any perhaps hope that he might come back victorious in the coming years?
Well, I don't think there's I don't think that's a great parallel, because I think there was some sort of fundamental differences between Jobs and Scully about the direction that Apple should take. Here, it's a bizarre sort of governance structure to begin with, right? OpenAI is governed by a board, like it's a nonprofit entity. And there's several sort of rumors. One is that Altman was talking to Middle Eastern investors. He's basically a money-raising guy. Maybe he was doing that. Then there are also concerns about safety. That maybe he isn't sufficiently concerned about safety. All of these things seem really vague and somewhat weird. It's like Google back in the day, saying we're going to do no evil, and then actually not doing evil and not getting data. I mean, business considerations trump anything else. And at this point, I think, certainly Microsoft sees a need to move quickly, but it's unclear what was going on in OpenAI's board and what they were thinking. But clearly, this was really poorly thought out because, the IP resides in people's heads, and there's little that the board can do about that.
And we're still waiting to see the full fallout of how many people, Sam may be able to take with him from OpenAI at this point. So what does this do in terms of resetting the landscape here? Now that Satya has made this move very smartly, very deftly, in a very short amount of time, what does this do to the competition in this space?
Well, I think it sort of further distances Microsoft from the competition, right? They made a brilliant move by investing in OpenAI, 49%, gave them access to the technology. But this move by OpenAI's board actually gives them, carte blanche to the IP, right? I mean, Altman's going to go there, Brockman's going to go there. I bet a bunch of employees will go there because this is a sort of an area where relationships really matter, right? And people like working with people that they have had a good history with. So yeah, expect to see a fair amount of IP just sort of walk out and walk into Microsoft. So great for Microsoft in sort of, further getting ahead of the competition in AI.
Now, of course, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Now that Microsoft does have Sam Altman here, what does that mean in terms of expectations? Because it seems like already with OpenAI on its own, things were already moving in leaps and bounds for Microsoft. Does this put a lot more pressure on Microsoft? But judging by what you've seen, can they actually live up to it?
Well, it's good pressure, right? It's one thing when you have pressure and you're behind and you don't have the best people. It's another thing when you have pressure and you have the best people and you're ahead. So this is good pressure, right? This is, it just manna from heaven, just dropped into their lap here. So I can see that Microsoft will be very happy with what's playing out there.
So if you're another tech company and you're seeing this very quick reshuffling here, how are you viewing it? How do you even begin to compete now that Microsoft, as you said, has made itself so much further ahead than the others?
Well, that's a great question, and I think there is competition, right? There's moves towards open source. Like a lot of people feel like AI should be open source. So in the longer term, we will see competition and we will see more pressure towards open source, especially when it comes to AI safety. So remains to be seen whether Microsoft actually embraces open source when it comes to AI, like the way they have sort of in general, right? Which is what Satya did. He sort of moved Microsoft away from its sort of closed proprietary architecture to open, to Unix, open source, cloud. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they move now that they have sort of complete control over the IP. To what extent they open it up. Anyone's guess at this point as to how they will and how long.
And given the cloudiness surrounding Altman's exit from OpenAI, does that perhaps do any damage to brand Microsoft, or perhaps what is left of OpenAI without Sam Altman? Where does it go from here?
That's a great question. For one thing, I think OpenAI will be sort of visiting its governance structure, right, which is really kind of murky. I don't think people were aware about the extent to which it's controlled by a 6-person board, many of whom people don't even know, right? So they have tremendous power. And I think what this move has brought to light is sort of, the fact that governance structure needs to be revisited. And I expect that's what they'll do in the weeks ahead.
Well, certainly has been a big wake-up call for them indeed. Thank you for breaking this down with us, Vasant Dhar, NYU Professor of Technology, Operations and Statistics and host of the podcast Brave New World. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much. My pleasure.
Let's talk about what exactly this means for Microsoft, because Microsoft's move to hire ousted OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is sending the stock to the upside here this morning. Now, the move that we saw earlier today would have added about $50 billion to the tech giant's market cap at the open. We're now seeing a bit of a more muted reaction, up just about 0.7% in the pre-market. For more on this, we want to bring in Rishi Jaluria. He is RBC software equity analyst. Rishi, it's good to see you. So the first question, obviously, to you is how big of a win is this from Microsoft getting Sam Altman to lead their new AI team?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. Look, this is a huge coup for Microsoft. I think there's no getting around that. This is probably the most eventful weekend I've ever seen in my decade plus covering software. And the worries that I think everyone had is the pace of innovation would slow down. Some of the AI halo around Microsoft that it's been enjoying in its multiple, would start to dissipate. Customers would get worried. And I think by bringing in Sam and Greg, right, and Sam is obviously the ultimate visionary when it comes to AI, it's really the best case scenario for Microsoft, given everything that transpired since Friday.
Rishi, I mean, like many of us out there, I imagine at some point over the weekend you were probably squinty-eyed into your phone early hours or late hours of the night and trying to figure out, okay, what does all of this mean for OpenAI's future, but as well for Microsoft, because this was about $10 billion that they were set to spend or earmarking to spend over several years to really further this investment in generative AI. How much of that perhaps do they get the opportunity to pull back at this point? Because according to some reports by Semaphore, it really hadn't been at least dispersed in full and perhaps not even keeping pace with how much investors expected it to be dispersed to this time.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think Microsoft is kind of in a situation where they have multiple ways they can win. Obviously, they have this relationship with OpenAI is going to continue. I don't think that goes away. I think they will continue to use GPT, and nothing's going to change there. However, will they put net new money to work at OpenAI? That remains to be seen. And at the same time, obviously, they've already been working on their own AI technology, and I think the pace at which Microsoft continues to develop their own tech that will probably be competitive with OpenAI, I think that will accelerate. So that's really how I see this playing out. Is it's kind of a Microsoft wins no matter what happens type of scenario.
Rishi, when it comes to the win, how Satya Nadella was able to get Altman on board in such a timely manner, I guess, what does that tell us just about the leadership, obviously, that we have seen under Satya Nadella and how this could set up Microsoft here for the next several years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as much as we've all admired Satya, we have to admire him even more now, right? Satya is the truth. And how he was able to pull this off, I don't think any of us know. I know, obviously, he and Sam had built up a very close relationship over the past several years and absolutely over the past year. And this was really kind of an out-of-the-box solution, right? I think what a lot of us were thinking is Sam was going to start up a new venture. Microsoft would invest in that, and it would take years to recover. And in kind of one quick move, Microsoft is actually probably ahead now versus where they were 3 days ago, because now they're in more direct control of their own destiny, right? They obviously saw the OpenAI relationship, but the worry that people had is, well, as OpenAI goes, Microsoft goes. Now you have Sam and Greg. And remember, if you read Satya's tweet between the lines, there are other colleagues joining them as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are going to be a lot of former OpenAI people who joined Microsoft as well.
Yeah, you've got some reports out this morning. Wired and Kara Swisher reporting this, that there are other OpenAI employees, including one of the co-founders, Ilya, that have signed a letter and are looking to perhaps look for some changes from the remaining board members, or else they will resign here and perhaps join Sam Altman, as you were just mentioning there a moment ago. So all of these things considered, say you're one of the other major players in tech that has made an investment into generative AI, and now you've potentially missed the opportunity twice on some of the brain trust that's within OpenAI. If there is kind of this flooding out of employees elsewhere, where does that leave some of the other players that are trying to make sure that they still have some of the market share here?
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult, right? I can tell you, look, I live in San Francisco. I can tell you firsthand, hiring qualified generative AI data scientists and engineers and talent is very, 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 very difficult. And, the Microsoft is now a destination employer for generative AI engineers. OpenAI was that. I think, this maybe even increases the gap between Microsoft and others that are trying to compete. That's not to say they can't succeed. That's not to say there can't be multiple winners. I truly believe there will be multiple winners in generative AI, especially when it comes to domain expertise. But right now, I think Microsoft continues to have the lead.
And Rishi, when it comes to the reasons here behind the potential firing, there were reports just about the speed at which Sam Altman was moving within OpenAI, some questions just about security and whether or not those risks were being properly addressed. Now that he's on board at Microsoft, I guess, how do you see Microsoft potentially approaching this? Or would you expect them maybe to be a bit more cautious given the fact that those risks within AI are still very prevalent and are still very much at the forefront of the minds of many of these investors?
I do expect Microsoft to be a little bit more cautious, right? I still think the pace of AI innovation continues at this breakneck speed that we've seen over the past year. However, because now this is happening inside at Microsoft and it's not arm's length, which is how it was with OpenAI before, I do think there will be more guardrails. You've heard Satya talk about how Microsoft is committed to, responsible and ethical AI, and I think that will continue. So I don't expect the rate of innovation to slow down, but absolutely, I do think there will be more guardrails around how AI develops within the four walls of Microsoft. In terms of if those reports are true, what that means for OpenAI. Recall that the next biggest player in this space, Anthropic, was founded by a number of ex-OpenAI employees who are kind of concerned around the commercialization and ethics. So it remains to be seen how that OpenAI versus Anthropic dynamic evolves. But yes, absolutely, I think Microsoft will put some more guardrails around AI development in-house.
It still costs a lot of money for OpenAI to be run. There were some reports, Analytics India magazine had also looked into this and revealed OpenAI's losses essentially doubling since starting ChatGPT. We know it's, about 5 cents every time somebody perhaps runs some boneheaded search on there and then tries to replicate that over and over again. $500 million a year is what they expected and kind of calculated the company is losing, could go bankrupt by the end of 2024 if it does not find a way to have a better revenue model and have it pass through to some margins there as well. Is this a company without Sam Altman that exists at the end of 2024, at the end of next year, if they're not able to have a better board structure and ultimately retain these employees?
I think OpenAI needs to make some changes, right? I mean, I think, the board structure stuff and board members and board composition, that's all publicly out there in the market. But I also think, OpenAI was kind of coasting on the purse strings of Microsoft. And, they were kind of able to invest as aggressively as they could without monetization, right? Like, let's be completely honest. I pay for ChatGPT 4 out of pocket. $20 a month is a very deep bargain compared to what, the value that I'm getting out of it. And so I think they need to figure out, how can they charge more? And I think without Sam and Greg and the rest of the team, that's going to be really difficult. So I think, absent some major changes, OpenAI is going to look like a very, very different company. Microsoft, on the other hand, they have a huge, huge, huge balance sheet. They can fund whatever research in generative AI probably for decades with no problem, especially given how profitable Office and Windows and even Azure are. So again, I think Microsoft ends up in a stronger position as a result.
All right, Rishi, Jaluria, always great to get your insight. Thanks so much for hopping on with us here this morning. RBC Capital Markets software equity analyst. Thanks, Rishi.
OpenAI is reportedly in intense discussions to bring back Sam Altman. That's after firing him 3 days ago and sending shockwaves throughout the tech industry. Altman was immediately hired by Microsoft, which saw shares of the company hitting record levels yesterday, but now they say they're open to sending him back. The Silicon Valley shakeup has been changing by the hour. Wall Street Journal reporter Dan Gallagher is joining us now. Dan, it is great to see you. So I guess to start, Dan, how do you think this plays out? Does Microsoft really bring in Sam Altman and maybe a whole bunch, hundreds of OpenAI employees? Hey, congrats Nadella. They bring in one of the hottest tech startups on the planet, valued at, I think, down around $90 billion. Or does OpenAI's board cave here, Altman returns, and things go back to something like normal?
Well, Josh, only a very small number of people have any sense as how that question is going to get answered. And actually, none of them are Satya Nadella at Microsoft, because Microsoft has no actual power here. So I think the only people that can really answer that are the remaining members of OpenAI's board and Sam himself. If they're obviously in some kind of discussion. And so how that plays out, and if they decide to cave and reverse, and he decides to actually go back, it's all in their hands. And from what I've seen, nobody outside that group has any strong inkling of how that's going to work. And
even many of the people, it seems like inside it, don't really know what they're doing, for lack of a better way of describing it, Dan. I mean, it just feels like that there is complete disarray, not to mention the fact that we still don't really understand what happened in the first place.
I think disarray is actually a mild term. This is a total mess, and I've been covering tech a very long time, and I've not seen a case like this, especially one where a company of this size, we're talking more than 700 people, have essentially almost all threatened to quit if a board of directors doesn't essentially reverse a very high-profile decision. This is, it's huge. And it's high stakes for Microsoft too. They've put a lot of money into OpenAI, really touted the partnership over this past year, and so they've got to see the situation salvaged in some way. I think hiring Sam and offering up to hire, pretty much everybody at OpenAI is was the best move they could make at the moment. But I think their ideal situation would be for Sam to go back to OpenAI and to have that leadership situation resolved.
And yeah, what do you make of Satya Nadella's leadership here? How do you think he's navigated this drama? I mean, reportedly he had, Daniel, basically no warning whatsoever this was happening. How do you think he's sort of managed it?
Probably as well as he could have in the circumstance, and the circumstance wasn't great. Again, they put so much money into this company, but actually have no say at it. So for finding out, it sounds like he found out like literally minutes before the news hit. Like when the rest of us did. So I think finding a way to hire him and bring in OpenAI again, that was probably the best thing they could do, as opposed to watching OpenAI fizzle and have all that talent kind of dispersed to other startups. But at the same time, again, Microsoft kind of now is in the situation where they've touted how important this partnership is. Now you're starting to see them get the word out of, oh, we've got great AI in-house, we can do this ourselves, and they're kind of trying to have it both ways now, and it's really hard to do that.
You have to wonder too if Microsoft is not the only big investor in OpenAI, right? You have Thrive Ventures, you have Khosla, and among others, and you have to think that they're among those who are also pushing for Altman to return because they don't want their investment wiped out. So you wonder, in the wake of all of this, if you also will have a rewriting of the organization of OpenAI, where the nonprofit part just goes away. As you say, Microsoft technically doesn't have control, but could we see a situation where they will, along with the other investors?
I think that's certainly possible. I mean, the only way, it's pretty clear that the only way Sam Altman's going to go back is if things are changed structurally at OpenAI, so the kind of situation doesn't happen again. So if he doesn't, they don't come to some agreement, like, they may keep their structure, but OpenAI sounds like it may largely cease to exist, at least in the way it has been. So if Altman goes back, then yeah, it gets interesting because, what do Microsoft and the other investors do to say, hey, we'd like actually to have some say here. We'd like to have some protection for us. And can they get that? It's certainly possible. It's a big what if right now because there's still a major, major hurdle to cross before you even get to that.
And Dan, I'll get you here on this. It's just a question I have about valuation, how you would think about it. OpenAI, reportedly valued around $90 billion. Let's say, Dan, Sam Altman did return to OpenAI. And so OpenAI staff, they stayed put. It returned to something like normal. Do you think that valuation would hold, or do you think it might take a hit, just given all the drama, the mess that we've seen here over the past few days?
It's possible they could hold it, but I don't think they could hold it immediately. I think what's happened has legitimately scared anybody with an eye towards investing in it. So I think what they would need is some time to actually, if he came back and made some changes at the structure and showed that the company was operating stably, possible they could get something around that. But again, if they got back and then he went out like next week to try to do that, I don't think that would work. So I think you would need a little time, a little breathing time for investors in the world to kind of see, have things stabilized here. Is this company going to be different going forward? So the answer is yes, but not right now.
Well, the latest reporting says they're trying to figure this all out before Thanksgiving, and hopefully that is true for all of our sake and what we're going to be doing over the holiday weekend. Dan Gallagher from the Wall Street Journal, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The abrupt ousting of OpenAI's co-founder and CEO Sam Altman took the tech world by storm, sparking a possible mass exodus of loyal employees. The artificial intelligence startup now faces possible legal perils, though. With more on the potential fallout, we're joined by Yahoo Finance's Alexis Keenan. Alexis, break down what's at stake here and some of the potential hurdles ahead.
Yeah, so it's Reuters that's reporting that there are a group of investors who are, quote, studying their legal options against the board of OpenAI. And that's over concerns that they could lose the hundreds of millions of dollars that they've poured into the company. But who these investors are, we're not really sure. We know that in the for-profit entity, you have Microsoft with a 49% stake. You have other investors as well as the company's employees with another 49% stake, as well as the non-for-profit that holds a 2% share. Now, what form these suits would take is a question, somewhat of a legal mess, and that's because of the very unusual corporate structure that OpenAI has. Take a look. Its parent company, it is a not-for-profit, and that non-for-profit, it controls the company's for-profit LLC, and that was raised back in 2019 in order to raise capital for the company. Now, with a non-for-profit, it becomes a little bit more difficult to argue that the board breached its fiduciary duties. If you think about it, a non-profit, right, it does not have an obligation to maximize profits. So it's a little bit of an unusual argument there. However, legal experts say that the board does, in fact, have fiduciary duties, duties of care, duties of loyalty, both in terms of the not-for-profit company as well as the for-profit LLC. You want to take a look, too. The nonprofit entity on its website, OpenAI, has long warned investors that its mission is clear, and they say it's wise for any investor to view their investment in the spirit of a donation. But these legal experts say, look, you can't just waste company assets. There's this caveat for LLCs that say some states do allow waiving of some of these duties. But to really add to this legal quagmire, this legal mess, it's not just investors that might have a potential legal action. You also have the employees in the company. They were anticipating a tender offer set to close, I believe, next month that was valued at approximately $86 billion. You also have the public. You have state attorneys general who would have the right to bring potentially a suit on behalf of the public. You also have Altman himself. You also have President and former board chair Greg Brockman. They may have grounds to sue for their ousting. So there are a lot of unclear potential legal avenues. It explains a lot why it is cast as studying right now, that the lawyers are at the table trying to figure out which entity could potentially face action and which parties could even bring suit. So a lot to unpack here, and we'll continue to watch as these issues develop. Guys?
Yeah, Alexis, it's pretty incredible when you think about how quickly this is all imploded. I mean, it was just 6 months ago we were talking about OpenAI being really the leader in this space. I'm curious on the investor part of it. As you pointed out, a number of VCs obviously potentially suing because of the loss in value. Is there any precedent that you can point to, any examples, recent examples of something similar that's happened with a private company like this?
Yeah, so that's one thing I've been asking these legal experts. And the way I've phrased it, though, is to say, look, has any company been able to put this nonprofit parent on top of a for-profit entity and therefore insulate themselves from liabilities? And they say, no, that this is highly unusual. And at the end of the day, they don't think that there will be able to be a full insulation of liability by taking that structure. It's just a very unusual position to take for these companies. But we know why OpenAI did it back in 2019, and that was so that it could get that outside funding to catapult it into the next chapter of their development. So no, it's very unusual, and I will keep searching, but so far have not seen an analog for this particular case.
Okay, we'll be looking out for any reporting on that front. Alexis, Keenan, thanks so much for that.
We're going to bring in Dan Ives. He is a Wedbush Managing Director and Senior Equity Analyst. Joining us now. Dan, you've been listening to our banter here about Microsoft, OpenAI, Sam Altman's departure and return. What's your big picture take about all of this?
Look, I think the clown show that was the OpenAI board, they're gone. And now adults are in the room. And from Microsoft, it's a champagne moment because they're in a better position than they were before this with the circus show board gone. And now you have Summers, Taylor, and probably others that are going to come on the board, potentially including Microsoft. And I think that's really the key to the stock, is that they are in a firmer position than when this whole twilight zone started.
Dan, when it comes to the future of this company, Satya Nadella tweeted out, put a post on X yesterday, shortly after these moves were announcing that this is the first essential step here in terms of the restructuring or reworking that we're seeing take place at OpenAI. When you look down the road and Microsoft's involvement here, I guess, do you expect to see more profound changes at OpenAI? And what are you hoping to see some of those changes look like as an analyst here for Microsoft?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think Nadella, if you look at really what happened here, I mean, this is a 4-person board that almost was going to take down a $90 billion company, right? They were essentially kids playing checkers at the kids' table, Thanksgiving. Nadella, the grandmaster chess wizard, came in and basically resolved that. Because when you look at OpenAI and Altman, this is the global face, the golden child of AI. That combined with Microsoft, look at NVIDIA in terms of what we saw last night. This is biggest tech transformation in 30 years. Microsoft's leading it. The last thing that could have happened is Altman goes free agent to Amazon, Google, or others. That's why right now I think Nadella is sleeping well, drinking his coffee.
Dan, I want to ask you about some of Sam's other ambitions here. I think that it's clear that the road has been paved for him to just go ahead with the for-profit initiatives that were causing some of the risk. But in the past, he sought billions of dollars from Middle East sovereign wealth funds. He wanted to form an AI chip company that would compete with the likes of NVIDIA. He's had ambitions going with SoftBank, partnering with Masayoshi Son for multi-billion-dollar investment in AI-oriented hardware. I'm wondering, does this kind of green light those ambitions, and where else are we going to see Sam coming into play here?
All of the above. I mean, because now that the clowns are out in the board, it's a green light. And I think, especially from a chip perspective, from Microsoft, this is Goldilocks. Because they never wanted everyone to come over to Microsoft. That was basically just a poker move. Now things are almost stronger position with better governance. And I think now it's all the above. Chips, they're going to go full force. And from Microsoft, that's why, I believe this is on its cusp, toward what I believe over the next year hitting $4 trillion.
Amy, on the issue of governance, how do you think these companies should be governed? Do the additions of Bret Taylor and Larry Summers on the OpenAI board, does that make you feel any more comfortable with what they're developing?
Well, on the one hand, it does. I think you want mature board members and mature governance because boards really aren't there for the most part as window dressing. They do serve a strategic purpose, and that board's number one priority should be strategic foresight, which is helping the company figure out where do they play and how do they win, but making sure that the public good is front and center, as well as safety, and thinking through long-term implications of the decisions that are being made. But the other thing is that we're approaching AI in a punitive way with regulation. That hasn't worked so far. Regulation is really hard to enforce because it is inherently a look back versus a look forward. The better way forward is to use an incentive structure that compels, in a financial way, companies to make better choices. This is something that has never been tried in the United States before, and I really do think the events that took place over the past few days shows us that we need a different approach going forward.
And Sinan, to Amy's point, when you look at the size of the people who are making this decision, this small board here, and you think of the mission of democratizing advanced AI, not wanting it to be in the hands of just a few, does this now fly in the face when you look at the kinds of investors who are really leading the charge here with OpenAI?
Well, I mean, I think that this board is not going to remain 3 members. This board is going to expand to a larger board, a much larger board. I think it's already been clear that Greg and Sam will not be on the board. I think those are concessions that they made upon the deal to come back. And who will be on the board and what the fine-grained details of the board structure will be remains to be seen and is very important. I think 2 things to keep in mind here that are optimistic about the future with regard to these types of technologies is first that safety and profits are ultimately in the long run aligned. So OpenAI does not remain long-term profitable to its maximum potential if it creates safety risks that become public and apparent and create damage and difficulties for the company downstream. But that requires a long-term view. It requires a view that sees developing safety as part of the profit incentive of the company looking long-term. The second thing is democratization is also in line with OpenAI's profit incentive, because ultimately it is a much larger pie if OpenAI is built as a platform company, a platform ecosystem where lots of other third parties can partake in value creation and value appropriation. One company doing it by itself is never going to compete with an ecosystem that has many different players contributing to that ecosystem. We've seen this time and again over the last 2 to 3 decades in tech, and I think this is not something that neither of these 2 points are lost on any board member that would join OpenAI. So I think that there is room for optimism in aligning the incentives, but I agree that these things must be thought about, both in terms of the corporate board structure and its decisions going forward, but also in terms of regulation. You saw President Biden's executive order on AI. It was big and it was bold. The details of enforcement and how that is actually laid out and enforced are really important, and demonstrating that an alignment between corporate innovation interests and government regulation as well as safety is crucial.
Boardroom chaos at OpenAI has highlighted the cracks in its corporate structure. But what about Microsoft? Even though Sam Altman is back at OpenAI, the tech giant might still be the winner. Shares of Microsoft spiked during the upheaval at OpenAI. Now, prior to Altman's return to OpenAI, Microsoft inviting the nonprofit's employees onto the Microsoft AI lab team. So is Microsoft on its way to dominating the AI industry? For more on this, Brent Bracelin, Piper Sandler analyst, is here to tell us more. So talk about the strategy here. We saw Satya Nadella voicing his support for Sam going back to OpenAI and continuing to support there. What is the strategy there as to how Microsoft still comes out on top?
Sure. Well, listen, it's been a very busy month with several new product launches, several user events where Microsoft is getting a buy-in for their first mover advantage in AI with really large enterprises. Accenture going wall to wall with GitHub Copilot powered by OpenAI and GPT-4. Large enterprises like Bayer and Shopify that are building their AI interfaces and functionality using Microsoft technology and OpenAI. So it is very critical as you think about Microsoft and this OpenAI relationship that they have a much better understanding of governance and controls and the opportunity. Things are happening very fast. There's a lot of excitement. Microsoft has this first mover advantage, but we've seen a little bit of risk here surface around the reliance around OpenAI and the structure there. Clearly, I think it was the right move for Microsoft to lend support over a very short period of time when the future of OpenAI was very uncertain. But ultimately, we do think that OpenAI and Microsoft are very, very close partners and will continue to be close partners. And we're certainly happy to see Sam and the team still together with minimal disruption to Microsoft's own AI ambitions.
Brent, with that said, this is a partnership that existed before the upheaval at OpenAI. Did anything fundamentally change for Microsoft over the last 5 days?
I think a lot has changed, right? I think one, it's exposed some additional risk right, around Microsoft's reliance around GPT-4 and OpenAI, and so I think there's also some risk to the structure of working with basically this leading innovator in AI that Microsoft has put some money into, yet doesn't have a lot of governance and control over. And so I think that's certainly surfacing as something that needs to be addressed. So absolutely, Microsoft's learned a lot over the last 4 days. Investors have learned a lot over the last 4 days. Ultimately, if you put the drama aside, I think this is probably one of the better outcomes for Microsoft, particularly if you see them now start to have a board seat and more say in the governance of this operation going forward.
OpenAI's ChatGPT took the world by storm a year ago and saw a flurry of tech companies eager to partner with the startup. Earlier this month, OpenAI reported 92% of Fortune 500 companies are currently using its products, with roughly 2 million developers building custom uses on its platforms. One company is Appian. The software company automates business processes for its clients, and several of its system services integrate ChatGPT. Appian's founder and CEO Matt Calkins joins us with more on how he's been viewing the chaos that's played out over the last 5 days. I'd imagine, Matt, that you've sort of been watching from afar, maybe a little nervous to see what's going to happen within OpenAI. But how have you been making sense of what has transpired over the last 5 days?
Yeah, now, of course, I'm watching it from the outside. I'm not on the board, not inside these discussions. But what it seems like is we've just had a breakdown, a kind of a governance failure, a different point of view between management and the board. And I can totally see how this happens. You know, in our industry, the software industry, we've got a lot of talented, essential, and sometimes unpolished people. And the board's job is to educate, not necessarily to discipline, but to try to smooth the edges without killing the golden goose. I started Appian when I was 26, and it's possible that I tested the patience of my board a few times as well.
So when you look at the current board makeup now, some of the names that are still being thrown out here, does that make you feel better about this issue of balancing the risks of AI with also the growth of the technology?
Yeah, well, I do think that we have a chance to restart now. OpenAI, I don't think this weekend solved any of the problems. Whatever problems existed there, we've still got them. But we have a chance for a reset. The issues are on the table, and I think we've got the best possible way now to address them in a professional manner. So that's good. It does really say something though about this industry. OpenAI is a flagship in AI, and we've had a close glimpse inside of how they work in the past few days. We see they're less than 1,000 people. We see that they've got this kind of a disagreement, this conflict between the board and the governance, that maybe nothing's perfect. It's really interesting to see what an absolute leader in AI looks like right now. And I think it's a signal to the rest of us that this is a growing and not necessarily a very mature industry in a lot of ways. This is what the bleeding edge looks like.
Matt, it's tough to believe that it's just been a year since the world has been introduced to ChatGPT. But talk to me about how Appian integrates OpenAI's technology and why that was a partnership that made sense for you. Has that idea shifted?
Yeah, it's been just a year. It's amazing. I think it was a year ago today that it broke out. We use OpenAI thoroughly in our product. And speaking not just for Appian here, but for our industry generally, the combination of generative AI and process automation is a beautiful thing. We could take a form and turn that form automatically into an application, collecting all the data, routing it to the right place, handling it like a case. It's amazing what you can do when generative AI is turned toward building a process, not just textual output. We also use it as a co-pilot to help you develop applications. We use it as a way to query vast volumes of text in order to understand their meaning quickly. The marriage of process automation and AI, specifically OpenAI's generative technology, has been extraordinarily productive.
But Matt, when you have a visionary CEO who literally the workforce is willing to move with him if he was going to move, if the board didn't get its act together, what does that mean in terms of the potential for perhaps diversifying or even developing your own in-house that doesn't rely on ChatGPT and OpenAI?
Well, look, as much as I admire what OpenAI has done, I think it's essential that every organization diversify their dependence on AI. You've seen here that these organizations that create the very cutting edge concepts are fluid. right? That they're subject to change. And so at Appian, we have partnerships with many AI providers, and we use the technology from many of them in our product. I think that's just prudent for any organization that's making a big bet on AI today.
And Matt, there's certainly a debate that's happening within AI about whether, in fact, this should be open source, whether this should be developed privately, how much transparency should exist. Kind of talk to me about how you're thinking about it and how you've kind of shifted, or whether, in fact, you have, as a result of what's played out at OpenAI.
Yeah. All right. Well, the privacy question comes down to safety. And I think a lot of the reason why a lot of people want to get inside how AI is being developed is because they want to be sure it's kept safe. And I understand that had something to do with this weekend's events as well, concerns about how worried we all are about safety. I think that the proposal to have the government look into red team data that came out of the White House a couple of weeks ago was a constructive first, very, very small and not particularly effective step, but it's a step. I think the main way we're going to keep this safe is not by forcing it to be closed, right, or forcing that there be no open source AI, but rather by regulating the data on which AI is trained. That's the key lever, and I'm surprised to date to see how little regulatory attention there is around this obvious avenue. The way to keep AI safe is not by limiting who can do it, or who can see it, or who can use it, but rather on what data can be trained to create these AI models, right? If you don't want it to be used to make a dangerous weapon, then you don't train it on weapons data. If you don't want to make a new virus, then don't allow it to be trained on viral data. If you don't want it to discriminate, then don't allow it to be trained on data that could create bias. If you don't want people to lose their rights over their own privacy, their copyrighted information, then forbid AI from being trained on that data. I think we're missing a big opportunity here in the regulation of AI to regulate it based on the data that can be put into the AI system. I don't think there's a perfect answer, and I don't think anybody's come up with a really credible way to keep AI safe per se. It's just too powerful for that. But I do think that we should be focusing on what data goes in.
On that point about regulating data, who should be driving the conversation? Is it entrepreneurs like Sam Altman, or should it be up to lawmakers in DC?
It should not be entrepreneurs like Sam Altman, and it should not be big tech. And I think that big tech has far too large of a voice today in the regulation of their own industry. You can see this in the White House resolution that came out recently, where the obligation of AI is merely to anonymize the data, the personal data that they're training on. That's not nearly enough, and that doesn't defend the rights of the people who create information or who are worried about their own privacy. We should instead expect the government to take the lead and to protect people who protect creators, protect people who own information and who are worried about their privacy. And that is not in the best interests of the people who create generative AI. They want to take every possible data they can get, every information, they will take copyrighted information and train on it if you let them, and private information as well. And I say we should stop letting them. The government needs to take the lead. Industry doesn't want that.
But Matt, is it actually possible for the government to take the lead when this technology is still in its infancy, as we saw the mistakes that were made in regulating the technology surrounding social media companies, that now policymakers are trying to put that genie back in the bottle? Has the horse already left the barn at this point?
No, it has not. No, there's still an open issue as to whether AI is allowed to be trained on copyrighted information. And if it is, then who owns the creation that AI could later make with reference to that copyrighted information, right? There's a lawsuit out there with a couple hundred authors signed on saying AI got trained on their works and now has knowledge of the works that they shouldn't have and can therefore create new works in the same style. And that's an infringement. I believe it is an infringement. I think that this is going to come to the judicial system immediately, and it might as well come to our legislative branch as well. We need to think about who owns what data and whether AI use of that data is an infringement.
Altman is back as OpenAI CEO, but the mood has shifted. Investors are keeping an eye on the broader landscape as governments lag behind the evolving tech, from Biden's new executive order to the EU's AI Act. So what's next in the road to regulation? Let's bring in former FDIC Chief Innovation Officer and Duke Professor Sultan Megji and Axios technology reporter Ashley Gold to discuss more. Thank you for joining us this morning. Sultan, I want to kick things off with you. What does this open up for regulators? We essentially had what could have been an acquisition without an acquisition if Altman had stayed at Microsoft. What do you think regulators will be focusing on with this wake-up call?
Oh, this is an incredible issue, right? Because one of the things we're struggling with on the regulatory side is understanding the impact of AI and how to keep the centralization issues that happened with social media, that happened with 5G, that happened with cloud, and now with broader big tech issues. This just looks like another way to get past the regulatory landscape. There are a lot of conversations here in DC about, well, we didn't have that issue this time, but what if this had happened? And so it absolutely will be on the minds of regulators.
Ashley, what are you hearing from your sources about how lawmakers, policymakers who have been trying to come up with some kind of framework for these guardrails, how they've been watching these developments?
Absolutely. So in Washington, it's Thanksgiving week and lawmakers tend to be a little more quiet during that week. I was hoping to talk to more of them over the weekend. But what we heard specifically from Senator Mark Warner and a couple others is that this turmoil at the top of OpenAI just goes to show that there needs to be rules of the road from the government in place to make sure AI is safe for people and is working for the best of humanity, no matter who is at the helm of these big companies. The lawmakers like Sam Altman, he's made a good impression on them in his trips to Washington. But, this shakeup is quite telling that maybe at the top here, there's disagreement over how far this technology should go. And I think when Congress ramps back up after Thanksgiving, we're going to be hearing a lot more about that.
And Ashley, on that point about what this policy could look like, there's a few templates on the table, right? There's the bill from Josh Hawley, Richard Blumenthal. There's also the executive order that's on the table too. Where's the consensus right now? Is it about transparency? Is it about sharing, sort of the red teaming? Like where are you hearing about where this is likely to go and likely to pass?
So I would say that there is still not a ton of agreement on the broad contours of AI regulation, but where we are seeing some agreement come up is transparency. Like you said, people want explainability. They want to know how these algorithms work. They want to know when what they're seeing is generated by AI versus a human. So that transparency part is something that everybody agrees on. There's also agreement that only the sort of biggest, most complicated, most dangerous advanced models are the ones that should be highly regulated. There is a sense that smaller AI companies that are doing AI models that aren't quite as impactful should not be caught up in the same regulations as these foundation models that OpenAI and others are working on. So I think that's a bit of a lesson we learned from the social media era, that it is not one size fits all when it comes to regulating technology, and companies of different sizes have different needs. So there's a lot of discussion about sort of the right sizing these regulations.
So Sultan, to that point then, should it be about a large framework that sort of oversees everything, or sort of building on the existing laws to protect when it comes to the sort of data that's being mined, consumer protection? Is that a way to sort of stay on top of it as the technology itself races ahead?
Now, given the likelihood of Congress passing anything reasonable is somewhere between 0 and a negative number, we're going to have to make use of the existing laws and the existing interpretations. The challenge is they're exclusively based on risk, right? And they're not based on the capabilities or the impacts. And so it's sort of like saying I have a regulation that works on a fax machine, therefore I'm going to apply it to email. It probably is good for the next year, maybe 2 years, but at some point Congress will have to start doing something to actually pass laws. The other challenge here is that if, foundational model is kind of a misnomer. There are dozens of companies that are very small, that are not publicly traded, that don't sit in front of the White House, that are fundamentally reshaping, for example, biotechnology or the markets. And so this notion of a framework based on size or scale of AI model is not going to work in this case, because the most impactful artificial intelligence companies aren't the ones in the news this week or last week or even for years. And so the way that it's being thought about, even inside of the regulatory frameworks, is going to miss a lot. And we're going to see issues over the next few years without a more comprehensive set of laws passed by Congress.
Sultan, when you think about these big tech names, you mentioned Microsoft, obviously been in the headlines, but Google, they have been under scrutiny from regulators for other issues, antitrust specifically. Microsoft, yes, they were under scrutiny for the Activision acquisition, but they've largely escaped some of that, partly because they've been in close conversation with these regulators. Yeah. I wonder if you think what has transpired over the last 5 days, that puts them right back in the center, the crosshairs of regulators, because in many ways it points to the sheer scale, the power, the money that Microsoft has in betting on this very technology.
Absolutely. What Microsoft has put just $10 billion into OpenAI and has the ability to fundamentally change what the board decided in 5 days with a couple of phone calls. And I think it does reframe how a lot of people are going to think about this. And whether it's Microsoft in particular or the big tech companies writ large, we're going to be in a situation, I'm positive, where the output of the last 5 days of chaos at OpenAI will fundamentally shift the regulatory lens back to the big tech companies that are writing these checks. And now, coming out of this process of 5 days, previous to this, Microsoft did not have a board seat. They were not even board observers at OpenAI. It's very clear that they will. And so now there's a new regulatory concern. And I think an antitrust discussion is going to end up happening no matter what.
So Ashley, if we're going to end up having this antitrust conversation, then what does that mean for some of these innovators? As you've mentioned and Sultan mentioned, it's a lot of these smaller innovators flying under the radar who perhaps aren't catching the eye of regulators. So how do you think regulations will proceed from here? What are some of the most promising legislations that you're seeing?
So in the past couple of years, we've had Congress making a valiant attempt to update the antitrust laws for the digital age with the American Innovation and Competition Online Act, a couple of App Store bills. Those bills made it pretty far in Congress, but they did not make it over the finish line. Where we've seen most of the action has been in the courts and in the federal agencies. You've got ongoing tech antitrust cases at the Justice Department and at the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission has promised to look at OpenAI as well. So I think, like the other panelist was saying about Congress moving very slowly, that where we're going to see the most action is in these federal agencies and in courts. We have to see who ends up filing a lawsuit, and that is where we're going to see most of the action when it comes to antitrust in the coming years. I think that we're shifting toward a world where the antitrust laws will be updated for the digital age, but it is very slow going.
Sultan, we haven't necessarily talked about sort of the VC side of things. Part of the what happens at OpenAI was, on the one hand, you had a nonprofit structure, but you had a for-profit arm where plenty of VCs were pouring in money there. Do you think that continues? You think they move forward a little more cautiously? Give me the pulse on that, because you've got a good vision on that side too.
I think for the last, let's say, 12 months, especially since the release of ChatGPT, there's been this gold rush, or view of a gold rush in the venture community, investing in kind of anything and everything. A few years before that, we saw the same group of people investing in organizations like FTX, kind of, enthusiastically, but not too thoughtfully. I would hope that a lot of the venture capital firms out there that are investing are really getting back to basics and saying, is the thing I'm investing in structured the right way? Does it have the right governance model? Does it have a board of directors that's a credible governance mechanism? Do they have product? Do they have algorithm? Do they understand the regulatory landscape? Do they understand these various discussions that we're having here? And I think we're going to see an evolution away from, these massive checks for PowerPoint presentations, frankly, turning to something that's a little more meaningful. We're also in an interesting cycle, as we've seen over the last few years, where there are a lot of venture firms that are going off to raise right now, and their investments may or may not have shown promise or shown any sort of delivery. Most venture firms, even if they say they're 6 or 7 year funds, really are trying to get exits within 3 years. So if you're investing in something that's a PowerPoint presentation, you've got to get out of it in 3 years to give your investors their money back. You're not in a situation where, you can really trust that the market inertia is going to take that value up now. You're in a situation where it comes down to basics. Are they selling? Are they making money? Do they have sticky customers? The normal, I'd call it bread and butter of venture capital. So I think there is going to be a change. And I think as we get into next year, I think raising for artificial intelligence is going to be a lot harder. It's going to be based on revenue. It's going to be based on technology. It's going to be based on governance.
And Sultan, just to quickly follow there, obviously some of the legislation that we've seen has been in reaction to developments from countries like China and their high tech in this space as well. Could that be what tips perhaps some sort of consensus in Congress to when they see that perhaps this is something they need to be getting ahead of as other countries pull forward that don't have that same red tape to get through?
That's a great question. You look at China on one side, which is moving incredibly quickly with very little regulatory input. You look at Europe, which is moving very quickly on regulatory with kind of less AI, and the US is kind of in the middle. The question is going to be, the balancing act between, letting innovation move at the pace of innovation or, slowing it down through some sort of regulatory evolution. And, the US has always kind of lived in the middle of those two worlds. And right now we're seeing that represented politically with one party being very much in favor of one and the other being very much in favor of the other. You can figure out who that is. And out of that, we're going to be in a situation where over the next 12 to 18 months, I'm hopeful we'll get to consensus, but I'm not sure we are because the economic impetus is still on lack of regulation. And that's still what's driving the fundamental investments in AI. It's not government research like it was 30 years ago when I got started. It's fundamentally based on, do you make money? And so then there will be a push against a regulatory solution.
Ashley, this feels like conversations in so many industries. To what extent does regulation oversee the safety of innovation without stifling the actual innovation? How much of what's happening around the world matters to lawmakers? Does that speed things up? Is this kind of a wake-up call, if you will, that they've got to move quicker because they didn't necessarily do that with other issues like social media and crypto?
It absolutely is a wake-up call, and I think you really saw that momentum moving when the Biden administration rolled out their AI executive order shortly before the global AI summit in the UK, where Vice President Kamala Harris was there with Rishi Sunak and other world leaders, and they really wanted to get something out there before the summit to say, hey, here's what the US is doing, here's our approach, and we think it's the best approach when it comes to balancing innovation and also, reeling in the possible most dangerous behavior. And we want everyone to be reminded that the top AI companies are American, and we want them to continue to be supported and grow here and not feel stifled. However, we're still looking out for safety. So the White House has been very careful about sort of towing that line and making sure that message gets across on the global stage. They have indicated that they think the EU has moved too quickly and that they cannot let China be the leader on this either for obvious reasons. So that is the line they've been towing.
Okay, we'll be watching to see how things move from here. Ashley Gold, Axios technology reporter, and Sultan Megji, former chief innovation officer, federal FDIC Duke professor, venture capitalist. Good to talk to both of you today. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Bye.
So Nina, at OpenAI, is the damage already done when you have this high profile of a fallout, then reinstatement, and ultimately a shift that we've seen, it seems at least from the outside looking in the corporate culture and trust in some of the leaders at the company up to the board level?
I think that is where they're going to be hit, right? With regards to trust, with regards to, their corporate governance structure. Like I said, for the past year, it's been about a year since ChatGPT came out. OpenAI has been riding high, and Sam Altman has really been kind of the epitome. I mean, he's a brilliant mind for, the incredible advances that are now happening in AI research. Since the breakthroughs that have been pioneered by OpenAI, but also other kind of AI frontier research companies have really come to the fore over the past 12 months. I mean, there has been a lot of intra competition between some of the companies, not only the big tech companies, but some of the other frontier AI companies. So I think that the incidents or what's happened over the last week with OpenAI will certainly serve them well. Other competitors like Anthropic, like Google, who isn't partnered with OpenAI, they will be looking to kind of move into that space, that kind of mythical space that OpenAI had occupied. So I think that, it hurts their brand. But will they continue to do incredible developments in AI research? Yes, absolutely. But it's a hotly contested space, and others will be stepping up too.
You mentioned, going back to what you just said a minute ago about commercializing generative AI. How does OpenAI, or I guess, what does that strategy, what does that approach look like when you're talking about commercializing generative AI, ChatGPT more effectively?
So, I mean, for OpenAI in particular, this has always been slightly a quandary, right? Because they were founded in 2015 with the mission to kind of protect AGI to develop AGI or super intelligent for the benefit of humanity. And what ended up happening last year was that they released an incredibly sophisticated large language model, ChatGPT, which for the first time really started to show us the beginnings of the so-called intelligence revolution, the capacity for AI systems to be able to augment and plug into human intelligent and creative processes, right? So for ChatGPT alone, for the past year, I've been speaking to multiple businesses who are thinking about how can we deploy a large language model like this within our organization for efficiency, for cost cutting, and actually, can we use something like this also to generate revenue? Can it help us come up with new strategy, with new ideas, with new predictive analysis? And that's what we've been seeing over the past year, not only with OpenAI and its ChatGPT product, but really the development of large language models across kind of the spectrum of big tech and frontier AI companies. So it's also worth remembering that large language models are the rage today, but they're only one kind of generative model, right? These capabilities are going to continue to increase, not least because the incredible amount of talent flowing into the space, as well as the money and the fact that pretty much all of big tech have become AI first companies. So I think we will continue to see these capabilities being developed at an exponential rate, as well as the adoption curve being higher than any kind of general technologies we've seen in the past. I think it'd be bigger than the internet. So when it comes to the world of work, and where the applications will be, that's really like asking how long is a piece of string. Because when you think of AI, it's more a meta technology than a technology itself. It's the technology that's going to enable platforms. It's going to enable applications. It's going to enable tools and products. So that's really what I see happening in the next few years with AI.